There are 4 stages of learning any complex skill that you need to know. And there are 4 corresponding actions that you have to take to be able to learn that skill effectively. When we do the right actions for the right stage, we're able to progress through that stage very quickly. This is what fast tracks our ability to learn skills. Unfortunately, most people are doing actions at stage 3 when they're only at stage 2. And when there's this misalignment, it creates wasted time, frustration, stress, and ultimately, you will not be able to master pretty much any complex skill. This is where the RAIL framework comes in, to make sure that we are aligned and mastering new skills as effectively as possible. By using this framework, my ability to coach students on how to study and learn more effectively has become about 5 or 6 times faster than before. What used to take me 2 years to train now only takes me 2 or 3 months. And I've personally used this framework to learn pretty much every new skill I've picked up over the last 10 years, from studying to public speaking, dancing, archery, photography, even using nunchucks. In fact, actually, let me show you. Oh, I don't break anything. As I do this, let's give it a go. Literally just hit my light. Nothing destroyed. And yes, FYI, that is a skill that serves absolutely no purpose in my life. But the best part is that this framework is actually really easy to use. By the end of this video, you'll learn how to use RAIL to learn any new complex skill. But first, we actually have to understand the scientific principle behind why some skills are even harder to learn than other skills in the first place. So when I was 15, I watched this video on how to tie shoelaces really quickly. And I practiced this skill for like 5 minutes and I learned how to do it. But learning to tie a shoelace is very different from learning to play an instrument or learning to code or most other complex skills. And one of the things that makes a complex skill complex is this thing called the latent learning period. Latent learning was first described in the 1930s by this American psychologist called Edward Tolman. And it basically talks about when there is no immediate reinforcement while you are learning the skill. For example, if I'm learning something simple like tying my shoelaces, then there's no real latent learning period. I'm getting immediate feedback on whether the shoes were tied up well or not. But as soon as we enter into any even moderately complex skill, the latent learning period stretches out much longer. For example, if you learn to play chess, you might spend lots of time, weeks even, just learning the rules and how to move which piece and figuring out the strategy. But until you really play a game and get some real experience, you're not going to know where your mistakes are and how to actually improve. And so there's a long time between the learning and then the getting feedback on the learning. That's the latent learning period. And for skills like learning how to study, you might not get feedback on how good your new study technique is for weeks or months until you actually get an exam result. And during that time, you might have done hundreds of other things that all affect the outcome. It's pretty much impossible to know what was the reason you got the result that you did, and therefore what you need to change to improve. And every skill, especially complex skills, take trial and error and experimentation to improve. But we waste a lot of time trialing things and making errors over and over again, sort of aimlessly. But if we can answer just one question, it can massively increase our ability to learn any complex skill. And that question is, am I moving in the right direction? Because even if we don't know the fastest, most direct line to learn a skill, if we have guidelines that tell us whenever we're potentially deviating off track, then we know that our experiments and our efforts are gonna eventually get us towards the goal rather than just wandering around aimlessly for years. And we can answer this question of, am I moving in the right direction, with the RAIL framework. Here's how it works. In the first stage of learning any complex skill, we're pretty clueless. We have no idea where to start. We don't know how to think about it. We don't even know what questions to ask because we don't know enough to even ask questions. And this is a huge problem because it means we don't know where to put our effort and attention. Because I'm a learning coach, I'm going to use learning to learn as an example. Most people have no idea really where to start increasing their learning efficiency. And they come in with a bunch of misconceptions about learning, like just thinking that more hours studying is the key to success. And even in my training program at I Can Study, where people are actually trying to upgrade their studying techniques, it is not uncommon for me to see someone skip a technique because they don't think it's important or relevant for them, when actually it might be literally the most important thing that they could possibly be working on. We don't know what we don't know. And trying to improve anything without knowing where to direct our effort is the biggest time waste of all. But this is the first stage of learning a new skill. It is the R of RAIL, and it stands for relevance. Because improving at this stage means understanding what is relevant for you and what is worth caring about. So how do you know you're at the relevance stage? Number one, you'll feel generally lost and confused about where to begin. You either can't think of many things to work on or experiment with, or there seem to be so many things to work on and experiment with that it's overwhelming, aka we don't know what to care about yet. You'll know you're making progress through this relevance stage when you start realizing more variables to think and care about, and things that seemed irrelevant before now become relevant. For learning to learn, these variables might be things like understanding what creates active learning, or being able to assess your cognitive load, or learning about different orders of learning, or understanding how encoding affects retrieval. So as you progress through the relevance stage, you're not actually getting any better at the skill. Like, you can't do it properly yet, and you're certainly not getting any results for it, but you are still progressing. And that's the key. So how do we actually make this progress? Well, the actions that help you progress through the relevance stage are number one, exploration, and two, challenging. Exploration means that we're spending time to understand the skill. Talk to people that are already good at it. What do they say you should be thinking about and caring about? Get a diverse range of opinions. Spend some time to learn more about the theory. What are the other variables that you should be thinking about? Challenging means that we're being open-minded and challenging our own beliefs or assumptions. Like I mentioned with learning to learn, a lot of people think that a certain technique is what they need to get better, but in reality, what's really holding them back might be another variable that they haven't considered or don't think is very important, like the way that they're practicing or how they're managing their time. And the only way that we can really find out what matters is to be open-minded to the idea that what we think is important right now might not be correct. Now, learning to learn is one of the most important skills that you can master because it makes learning everything else in your life much easier. However, it is probably one of the most challenging skills to learn because that is an incredibly long, latent learning period. And seeing people trying to learn and struggling and stressing because they don't know where to start is not only really sad, but it's very frustrating for me because it is so much easier when you know what to care about. So to help you with this, I've created a free learning system health check quiz for you. It's a free quiz that you can take that will evaluate your learning system and score you out of 100. But more importantly, you'll get a personalized report that will give you which components you're doing well on and then which parts that are holding you back from being a learning master. Now, for learning to learn, this quiz should probably get you almost to the end of stage 1 of RAIL. And it only takes like 10 minutes. FYI, it took me like 2 years to get to the end of stage 1 because I had no one to teach me, and I was literally spending like thousands of hours reading research papers and thinking about the way that I learn. For some people, they never reach the end of stage 1 for their entire lives. But you can now skip all that. I've got the link to the quiz in the description below. So anyway, we're now at the end of stage 1, relevance. We know what to care about. We know what the variables are. What now? Well, this is the part in skill acquisition research which is called the plateau period. It's often the part where most people give up. In the second stage of learning a skill, we are trying to perform the skill, but we are consistently failing. Sometimes we know why we failed and sometimes we don't. We continuously make mistakes and we don't seem to be making any clear progress. This is why it's called the plateau period. It's frustrating and demotivating, and so this is when a lot of people will give up. But not if you know the rail framework, because the second stage is the awareness stage. As in, we're becoming more aware of our mistakes. And a key sign that you're in this stage is that you are trying and making mistakes. Hopefully, lots of mistakes. Think of it like a checklist. Let's say to learn a skill correctly, you need to make 100 mistakes in order to finally be able to do it correctly for the first time. In that case, progress is about making as many of those mistakes as quickly as possible. So making mistakes doesn't feel good, but it is helpful and necessary. Once you know how to overcome the mistakes, doing it correctly happens by default. A lot of people who go through my program hold off on practicing new techniques because they're afraid of making mistakes and getting it wrong. They can spend days or even weeks just thinking about it and asking questions to try to avoid every possible mistake they can think of. And then by the time it comes to give it a go, their head is so full of things to try to avoid that they become overwhelmed and paralyzed. On the other hand, people who recognize the value of learning from mistakes can give things a go and pick up a new skill within days. So as you progress through the awareness stage, again, you're still not doing it correctly yet, and you're still not seeing good results, but you are progressing by becoming more aware of the mistakes you tend to make. So how can you progress through the awareness stage more quickly? Well, the two actions here are experimentation and reflection. Experimentation is about trying to perform the skill correctly and probably making mistakes. Reflection is about thinking what those mistakes were and why you made them. We can then try a new experiment based on that reflection to try to overcome that mistake. If it was a repeated mistake that you already knew about, you think, well, what am I missing? What's the variable that I haven't considered? And if you don't even know what your mistake was in the first place, you need to get feedback from someone who does know. And everyone needs feedback. Even the highest performing athletes in the world have coaches to give them feedback. Like I said, we don't know what we don't know. Awareness is about knowing more things so that we can overcome them. And it's hard to gain awareness when you're going through it alone. So as you move through this second stage of awareness, we are making less and less mistakes, and at a certain point, there are no more mistakes we're making. This is the sign that we're nearing the end of stage 2. Now you might think at this point, we're done. We've learned the skill, we're not making any mistakes, time to move on with my life. But unfortunately, not. We're now only entering into stage 3 of 4, and stage 3 is another point at which many people tend to give up. Now, before we get into stage 3, it's important to know why rail even works. And it's because it's derived from another widely studied model called the 4 stages of competence. In this original model, the stages are called unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. And I love this model, and I even teach it in my program, but the reason I'm teaching you rail is because the 4 stages of competence is very dense and there are a lot of nuances. It's also a little abstract and it doesn't actually tell you what you need to do to progress through the stages. The reason I developed rail is so that you'd have something that's a little more practical, especially for stage 3. And that's because stage 3 can be even more demotivating than stage 2 if you don't have rail. So at stage 3, we've finally overcome our mistakes. We've learned how to do the skill correctly. However, it takes a lot of effort. We're not very consistent and it's pretty slow. And that's because it's a brand new skill. Because it's brand new, it's slower and takes more effort than our previous habits and how we used to do things. And in the early part of stage 3, our consistency is so bad that out of 10 attempts, we might only get it correct 2 or 3 times, which is why stage 3 is called iteration. And you know you're in stage 3 when you've been able to perform the technique correctly at least 1 or 2 times, and you're not discovering any new mistakes, but you're struggling to overcome all of them every time. You know, you're progressing through stage 3 when with each cycle or iteration, you feel that your consistency is improving and you're able to do the technique correctly a higher percentage of the time. You're starting to feel that it's becoming easier to do it and it requires less effort, and you're getting faster as well. And it must be in that order. If you try to go faster when you don't have the consistency and accuracy yet, you're just going to be increasing your error rate. This is a common reason for demotivation and why people might give up at this stage. So to progress through this stage more quickly, we want to take these 2 actions, which is varied practice and adjust. So varied practice isn't just performing the skill again and again. It's actually about performing the skill in different levels of challenge, different contexts, and in different conditions. If you're learning a new study technique, you want to apply it to lots of different subjects with different volumes of workload through different mediums and different difficulties. Adjust means you're observing how your consistency changes in each of these different contexts and levels of difficulty. Adjusting involves fine-tuning your technique so that you can maintain your consistency even when the situation isn't optimal. For example, how do you adjust your technique for different subjects, or for when you're tired, or when you don't have as much time to study? Again, I'm using study techniques as an example here, but you can use this for literally any other skill. And after enough iterations, you'll notice that you're able to perform the skill with a high level of consistency, with a low level of effort, and you're able to do it very fast. This means you've entered the final stage of rail. And it's when your new skill has become a new habit. It's just as easy as any other habit, and in fact, it actually takes effort to do it differently. At this stage, the actions to take are not so much about improving the technique, but about refining it to make it better if it needs to be, and regularly using it, because if you don't use it enough, you will lose it. This is a phenomenon called skill decay, and it can happen for any skill that's neglected, and it causes us to slip down into the earlier stages of rail. And because stage 4 is about keeping your skills for life, it is called the lifelong stage. So you can now use rail to figure out what stage you're in, see whether the actions you've been taking to learn a new complex skill have been aligned for the stage you're at, and start taking the right action to progress you to the next stage more quickly. And if you're wanting to get a head start on the rail framework for one of the most complex and important skills that you can ever learn, aka learning to learn, then make sure to check out that free learning system health check quiz linked in the description below. As usual, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.